So welcome to Circular Actions, our lunchtime session. So we're really excited to be welcoming our two guest speakers to this discussion session. So we'll be hearing from Neliana Fuenmayor, who's the founder of A Transparent Company and who's going to be giving us amazing insights on her work with industry, her work on transparency, and hopefully talking a little bit about chemicals. And we're also really happy to welcome Clare Farrell. So Clare has a background in fashion design and is mostly known for her amazing work with Extinction Rebellion and being this amazing activist in the field and really talking about these really pressing issues around climate emergency. So we'll first hear from each of our speakers in a quick 15-minute presentation. And then we'll have everyone together and we'll be having a session of Q&A between Cathryn, myself, Neliana, and Clare before we start taking questions from the audience. So do feel free to pop any question in the chat at any point during the presentations, and we'll make sure that these are brought into the conversation online. Obviously, if there are loads and loads of questions, we might not be able to address all of them, but as I've been stressing throughout the day, this is the start of a conversation, and if there's anything, just please feel free to drop your email or offer a platform to keep this conversation going. We really want this to be the beginning of some meaningful interactions between all of you. So thanks a lot. I'd like now to welcome Neliana. And Neliana, if you're okay to share your screen. Hi there, it's very nice to see you.
Hi everyone.
I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am really happy to be here at the There and Back Again symposium with Central Sustainable Circular Design. And yeah, I'm very happy to see so many of you here. So I will be sharing with you the work that we're doing and what we have done as well and what we are working towards. And yes, I will also discuss some of the chemical parts that we've been working on. So thank you, everyone. Just going to. So, a transparent company is a consultancy, but I like to call it a collective intelligence network of experts that we care about sustainable fashion innovation. And our aim is to accelerate positive impact in the fashion industry through our unique services and solutions. Why we are a consultancy is because it's a way to work with different types of stakeholders within the industry and to be able to accelerate certain steps that are needed in order to create that positive impact that we all want to see manifested. And we have three sectors in the way we work. One is mindset, which is about information and education that needs to be shared on how to build trust in our industry, and how do we take that into the intelligence part and use tools and solutions that can help us, for example, create greater traceability. And then transparency and how innovation can help us to get to that place where we want to see all this coming together, and we care about transparency. So our journey is how to connect physical journeys to digital stories, and how can we back this with data. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Venezuelan, and I moved to London in 2006 to study my fashion design course in London College of Fashion. So I am a UL baby, and back then it was 2009 when I graduated and the Central Sustainable Fashion was funded, and that was a perfect moment for me to take my collection into the sustainable field, as I wanted to explore new materials and find alternatives, in this case to fur. So I was using wools from back home in the Andes in Venezuela, and I was creating my own glasses with recycled wood. So this was almost a long time ago, and I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't with the support of University of the Arts. I was already looking into the future of bringing sustainability in fashion. I worked for different brands like Burberry and Stella McCartney and Pring of Scotland. And soon after that, I decided to do my own brand. And this is when actually a transparent company came about. In 2012, I was already looking at how can actually transparency be the word that connects sustainability from a point of view of both social and environmental. And I founded this brand called Ether, and that led me to explore the world of entrepreneurship. And I went back to school, to LCF, to do my MA in fashion entrepreneurship and innovation. And again, through sustainable, Center Sustainable Fashion, there was a partnership with Caring at the time, and I didn't think twice to apply. And long story short, towards the end of my MA, that I focused my research in transparency in fashion, I won the Caring Award, and I went to work for Stella McCartney at a sustainable department. And that led to many more things. The cool thing about going back to school was that I had time to think about why transparency matters so much to me. And this is a great thing about being in an academic environment, that you have the support to do more research. And this is when technology came about. I was looking at blockchain technology to actually answer the question of how can we prove a claim? How can we be transparent, and how can we back up stories with data? So this was part of my journey of get into a new world, which was the technology world. In 2017, that led to us tracking the world's first garment on blockchain with Danish fashion designer Martin Jarlark in collaboration with Provenance, a software company here in London. So long story short, I was learning how can blockchain be implemented in supply chains in the food industry first, before I jumped into the fashion and came up with this project that also was part of the fashion innovation agency in LCF, and we did a documentary. So this was like the first time that the word fashion and blockchain were combined. And this led to many, many more questions. So how do we connect products? How do we back up the data? How do we not overwhelm the consumer with so much information? And how do we use technologies such as near-field communications tags to provide this information at the point of purchase? Same year, in December 2017, the first report by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was published, which I'm sure you all know about it, the new circular economy for fashion, and they had reported on blockchain technology as an example, and how digital advances can improve transparency and help sorters, collectors, recyclers with more information on how to deal with this process. But this was the first time for me that I was looking at the whole picture of not just from farm to end product, but how can we use blockchain technology to help create that circularity that we all aim for. So this is when I created this slide thinking of how our supply chain currently today. So on the left side, we see that it's fragmented, it's linear, it's complex, it's not transparent, in the sense that the brand doesn't necessarily know what the raw material is coming from, and sometimes they don't even know who is the farmer, or simply suppliers having subcontractors, and this is where issues like modern slavery, for example, child labor can happen. So brands are in this very hot spot, as we know. We are demanding transparency, we're demanding who made my clothes, we're demanding all this information. And the truth is, they don't know what they don't know. And a proposal on how this linear, fragmented, and complex supply chain of fashion today can become circular is by utilizing blockchain technology, which is a decentralized ledger that allows for data to flow from actor to actor in a seamless way, in a more secure way, and where information cannot be tamed, is interoperable, and that means that the the level of trust on the data and the transparency can thrive, in the sense that there's less space for fraud or for information that is not accurate. So as a brand in this scenario, they will be able to have all this information at glance on who and where and what is happening, and that way then they can communicate to us consumers. And not only that, but how can consumers, we can be part of the post-consumption process and help repair, resell, rent, and ultimately recycle these products back into the loop of the supply chain. This all sounds great, but this is very complex, right? So we worked with small brands, so are a step ahead in terms of innovation, and their supply chains are vertical and a bit more flexible, as well as more simplified to use this technology. So we partner, for example, with Bean London. This is a beautiful accessory brand label here in London that makes bags out of different materials. In this case, it's a recycled leather bag, and with contactless labels that we have created for them, you are able as a user and consumer to learn more about your product. Because if we are honest, we consumers, we want to buy those products that we vote with our wallets by supporting these products, these brands, selling these beautiful products. But information is very important, and we need to make it as simple as possible. So this is why we work with companies like Parcel from Denmark, for example. Oops, sorry, just want to show you this video, where we basically help them communicate the stories. And I think design is such an important part. And sometimes when we talk about supply chains, coming from a fashion background, when you enter the supply chain world, design is sometimes not so much talked about. And in my opinion, this is where exactly the opportunity to drive positive impact lies. The designer has the responsibility to know why you're choosing the material that you're choosing for that product that you want to create and bring into this world. One of the design principles is that we should not, as designers, create something that it's not needed. And so how do we bring products that are going to contribute to our economy and to our industry? So I just want to show you here a little bit how it works in terms of communicating these products and this information and connecting the products. So this is like a swing tag. Just want to show you long, as well as in the label of the products itself. So there's a lot of questions about this type of labeling and technologies, but this is a way to start building and that path towards consumers really having that level of transparency that we are aiming for, and how to make supply chains part of the story and make the invisible visible. How do we bring all of the actors that make up our products into one scan? So that's from a small SME perspective. Nothing can be a true solution if it's not scalable. So as part of my journey to bring blockchain to fashion, I have worked with multi-stakeholder initiatives, MSIs. In this case, Sustainable Product Coalition, that focus more on the social aspect, and Roadmap to Zero, which focuses more on the environmental aspect, especially chemicals and textiles. So I was commissioned to do a report on how can blockchain increase traceability and transparency using blockchain technology for the apparel, textile, and footwear industries. So as a summary of part of the proposal on this report is, we need to look at how can we analyze industry standards and find a harmonization and data point alignment. In our industries, there are a lot of potential solutions, and they include certifications, sustainable standards, and so on. One of the main issues as well we've got, or challenges we've got, is how do we measure impact? So this is the start of how can we look at social impact, environmental impact, governance, and investment in a way that it all comes together in one place, which here we're proposing is a multi-stakeholder ledger, using blockchain technology to align those data points, to look for a common language, and to really truly collaborate in a space where we feel safe to share data, verify data, and to compare apples to pears in a way that it makes sense for the ultimate goal, which is becoming circular, transparent, sustainable, and that we're all part of this solution. So I'm going to go through this part quite quickly, but basically this is a proposal of how all these organizations and standards and certifications could collaborate in a way that they are sharing one database or ledger as a single point of truth for an industry that is looking and working towards the same goals. For this report, we focus on viscose. So technically, if you open up one block, in each block of the blockchain, you will be able to then answer or submit data on certain data points. For example, on the sustainable sourcing of the pulp of the tree and the extraction process. And of course, product compliance is extremely important. And how do you stamp this information, and how do you make it verifiable at the end of the process? So in block 2, we will have the fiber process, for example, purified cellulose, wet spinning, again, product compliance, and at the production level design. So this is really interesting for the discussion today. How can we, for example, provide information on how that pattern was created for circularity? So these are really interesting points from a design perspective on how can we take a step further and make fashion design for circularity be a standard, for example. Again, manufacturing and product compliance of the manufacturing, and then at product level, what is the information that that product will contain in the swing tag? What is the verification or the certifications that are going to be consumer facing? And again, what is the social performance and environmental impact? And here, very importantly, care and recycling for post-consumer purposes. So this report, we launched it last January as part of the Future Fabric Expo, the 9th edition, before the world became so virtual like we are now. This lady here in red, she is Maria Teresa, and she's running a project in the UN that we are working with as part of this report. It's a 3-year project utilizing blockchain as a technology and looking at how can actually be implemented for a industry-wide solution. I really particularly like this because if we go back to what I was showing you, like small brand, first garment being tracked, and SMEs trying to work with this technology to working with MSIs that have all these big brands under their membership. But how can we bring a solution that is industry-wide and, more importantly, open source? So this is what we're looking at, and we're creating a proof of concept first with Egyptian cotton. So just to give you an overview of what we're looking at and the actors that we are collaborating. And so I'm representing CDHC in this project and looking at the chemical criteria and the data points that are needed in order to bring all of this to a reality. And the brands collaborating are Stella McCartney, Hugo Boss, Vivienne Westwood, and Burberry, and other ones. So I think for you guys it will be interesting to learn more about how can you know more about the materials that you're choosing when designing. So as part of the Sustainable Fashion, the Future Fabric Expo of the Sustainable Angle last January, we also created QR codes for bridging the information that you can see in the hangers into their virtual fabric expo. So again, taking a step back on the actual final product, how do we bring this information from the fabric, the material, to the actual library of materials that they are designing? This is really exciting. So as part of my job as a consultant is to look for opportunities and collaborations. And this is where chemistry and fashion is coming together. So as part of the report on blockchain with CDHC, Roadmap to Zero, and the work with the Future Fabric Expo, we are understanding that the industry is ready to ask, what's in my clothes? And therefore, there is more information to be shared in an effective way to consumers without greenwashing. So we're looking at how can the knowledge from the MSI, Roadmap to Zero, CDHC, and the MSL, which is the Manufacturing Restricted Substance List, can inform designers when they go into a fabric fair, such as Future Fabric Expo, and learn more about the chemicals in the textile that they are purchasing, and that way to inform yourselves more on what materials you're choosing. So I just wanted to show you also this. I'm going to put the link on the chat. It's a great resource for understanding more about chemistry. Most of you probably are fashion designers, and if I'm honest, my chemistry knowledge is not great. So this book is really good to understand more about what we need to know as fashion designers, or in our fashion industry, whatever role you have, to understand chemicals in the fashion industry. So yeah, we are bringing this together, and we are working towards creating a fifth criteria for the sustainable angle. And it's a collaboration between the CHC knowledge and the team and Future Fabric Expo. And of course, that 3 has a great design principle on chemicals, which I'm sure most of you have seen, but if not, I'll invite you to. Yeah, I would say, I know there's quite a few questions I'll be happy to answer. And I just would like to say that as part of designers, as designers in this fashion industry, we need to really know how important every time we choose a material, we make a decision about pattern, we will have a huge impact in our supply chain industry. So let's take responsibility and let's obviously ask questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Neliana. That was really brilliant. And yes, like I said, we'll have questions coming through at the end. Now, to try and catch up on time, I'll ask Claire to come in straight away.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Hello, everybody. So, as you know, my name's Clare Farrell, and I worked a little bit with Becky early when I finished my degree, which was really a lucky find, because I was really struggling to find places to go and work with people on issues around the environment and fashion and sustainability. I graduated from Middlesex University, and I went on to work in the high street sector. I worked with very, very nasty brands and factories and suppliers. And then a little while after I sort of realised I totally couldn't handle being in the commercial fashion sector anymore, I went into work with small brands, upcycling, a lot of recycling, and lecturing on fashion and sustainability issues for about 10 years, doing a short course at St Martin's. And I guess the whole time I've been variously involved in activism. And now that really takes up the majority of my time, having helped to found Extinction Rebellion here in the UK. And so this picture is an image from our book, This Is Not a Drill, which I helped to co-edit, and it's an illustration from David Shrigley, which was very kind of him to give it to us. And I think it's really the only question often that I think we should really be putting at the top of the list right now. I'm sure you're all really, really well aware of the situation that we're in, but humanity's in dire straits. And is this question a design question, is what I was kind of thinking about whilst I was preparing for this presentation. And I guess one of the things that I think is really important to ask ourselves is whether or not we're really using our imagination here. I think the crisis that we face, so the convergence of many, many crises, one element of them is an abject lack of imagination. Another one is an abject lack of political will. So when we look at the situation that we're faced with environmentally and how it intrinsic global equity, geopolitical relations, power, business, culture, politics, it's a very complex scenario that we're facing, and the odds are pretty shit. So this is my starting point, and I quite often just have to sort of pinch myself to ask, are we really in the situation that we're in? Can it really be so much worse now than it was when I first got interested in sustainability matters of the environment, which I would say interestingly come from an interest in chemistry, and the CFC crisis actually I think was one of the things that really pushed me into an environmental mindset as a young person. And you may know that in Extinction Rebellion, one of our big messages is tell the truth. And one of the truths that we've pushed quite heavily, and I think is fundamentally important here, is to face death. Facing our own mortality is something which I have found is a really, really important facet in recognizing what's the cultural lack that we have that stops us from being able to live our lives in line with our values. And I worry sometimes that the circularity conversation avoids that. When we talk about a life cycle, we talk about human life cycles, don't we? And we talk about product life cycles. But my experience of life, I'm pretty certain, is going to be very, very linear. I'm going to be born, grow up, and I'll get old, decay a bit, and then die. If we can't face that truth, I think that's a problem. If we can't face the truth of the fact that most of our products are in a linear system, then I think we've got a problem as well. And I just wanted to read a quote from a dear friend of mine who recently died, David Graeber, who's a fantastic mind. And he wrote an essay about called The Apocalypse of Objects, which I really recommend. I found it totally inspiring and mind-opening. He brings the idea of objects and human mortality together like this. The factory floor and incinerator are considered just as properly kept out of sight as the hospital ward and the crematorium. This in turn makes it easier to imagine manufactured goods, which then become the paradigm, or all material goods or human beings as discrete, freestanding, self-identical entities that just sort of leap into being and then disappear again, rather than as themselves ongoing processes, patterns of change, fundamentally entangled in the world around them, as nouns instead of verbs. The world is full of things to which we give names, rather than being a jumble of processes of growth and decay, crumbling and assembly, fermentation, preservation, quiescence, explosion, contamination. One where what might at times seem discrete objects usually disposed to melt into one another, where humans are always transforming everything around them, and where maintaining things in more or less the same form often requires even more attentive labour than transforming them. The notion that there is some fixed, usually immaterial essence to people and objects existing on an abstract plane that is somehow prior to, but also higher and purer than materiality, would appear to come directly out of the habit of looking at the world, which eventually drove us to hide death and childbirth out of sight. So for me, this is something which has really, really affected my thinking about what is going on when we use the language of cycles. What's going on when we convince ourselves that this is a sort of a workable system, when we know that the infrastructure in the real world isn't there to back it up, and there's so much needs to be done. And I think a lot of it, from my work in XR anyway, feels that it's often to do with understanding power relations. It's often to do with working with the dynamics of what's present for us right now. And so we decided to start a rebellion. I didn't expect it to work, actually, very as well as it has. So that came as a bit of a surprise. I was experimenting with tactics and methods of doing civil disobedience. Hunger striking, being arrested multiple times, breaking bail terms, risking jail sentences. And we did all of this experimentation to work out kind of what might work, and sort of, speaking of this complex system, what happens when you sort of poke it in one place, and what happens when you sort of poke it in a different place. And it's been really the most fascinating journey for me, working alongside the other people who've been doing this really, really deep research into the sociological and psychological and organizational kind of approaches that we might take to setting up a mass movement that engages in non-violent civil disobedience. And so almost 2 years ago now, we declared a rebellion against the state. We said we're in open, peaceful rebellion. From here on, social contract has been broken. So in theory, we are obedient citizens of a nation because the nation state has a deal with us, which is that they will protect us, they will look after us, they will keep things, they'll keep people safe, they'll keep things working well. And I think, especially in light of Black Lives Matter, it's clear that for many, many people, the social contract has been well and truly broken for an extremely long time. But right now, we're in a situation where that has become quite universal, I would say, as the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis seems to infringe on people's right to life, their right to family life. Some quite fundamental human rights at threat here because of the destruction of the natural world. And I guess we wanted to look at doing something that felt proportional to the problem that we faced, and also with the understanding that actions speak louder than words. And so Extinction Rebellion was set up to be not a DIY movement, but a do-it-together movement. And we coined that phrase in the art department when we were developing the concepts for our workshops. And these evolved into something about circularity that's part of XR, which I wanted to bring, which is that we don't have a merchandise line, partly because myself and others said there's no fucking way you're selling t-shirts to save the planet, because that's idiotic. And with my background in sort of working with textile waste and understanding the vast amount of product that already exists that's being thrown away, I wanted to make sure that people made their own stuff. And so we encourage people to take on this practice of block printing. And often you do this in a disobedient space, in an occupied space. We have different methods which are interesting. People hand carve printing blocks, people 3D print artworks that have come from original hand carvings. People have used wood, CNC, all different methods to produce these blocks so that we can share them and people can produce their own merchandise in a way, which doesn't cost any money, importantly. And which means that it's action-based. So you can't buy your way into this movement. You have to, even if you want a t-shirt, you have to do that through action. And thinking very much about using things that already exist to make new messages, and how we communicate using our bodies during protest. The other thing that XR has been very good at, which is relevant here, is campaigning at the fashion industry. And I think, again, recognizing that the fashion sector is a major contributor to popular culture. It has a huge amount of cultural power. And if you have that right now, then you have a massive responsibility. So we went to London Fashion Week, we wrote them a letter and said, we're going to block the roads outside your shows. and we'll be non-violent. We won't interfere with your shows. We won't interfere with your clientele or the audiences, but we will be there and we will be disruptive in a very kind of traditional civil disobedience sense. And so there's been several strands to the work around fashion that XR's put into the world. So we promoted a 1 year long new materials and new clothing boycott, which was quite successful. And also in parallel, this campaign to ask them to cancel London Fashion Week and instead to hold an assembly of the industry to think about what they're going to do, because I'm sure you all know that the truth of the fashion industry is that it wants to grow, the industry wants to expand, and the estimation that we can take from the reporting says that we could see the fashion industry could use more than 26% of the global carbon budget associated with a 2-degree pathway, which, by the way, is totally reckless and very dangerous, by 2050. And I don't know about you, but I really don't want hyperconsumption, individualism, the feeling of never being good enough, the mental health crisis, and the faster and faster and more exploitative industry to also be impacting on climate change, global warming as extremely as that. So something serious has to happen. And this is, again, where I think you can see that climate and racism and inequality and global inequality is really starting to become very clear to people. And the most clarity I've read on this, I thought was fantastic, just last week, was a quote from a piece by Sandra Nielsen in The State of Fashion, and she quotes Hop Hopkins. She says, "You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. You can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. And you can't have disposable people without racism." In sacrifice zones, it is amply clear how environmental destruction and racism merge into one, and racism is ultimately built into the definition of fashion as we know it. So we also launched Extinction Rebellion with some of this messaging: when hope dies, action begins. And I think this is also something that relates really closely to the circularity conversation, because often people find the circularity narrative to be extremely comforting, positive. Maybe we can just keep some stuff out of the bin and we can recycle better and everything will be okay. But I think what we meant when we set out with this message, hope dies, action begins, is that we don't need to feel hopeful in order to act in a virtuous way. And I would say that we need to really understand the lack of hope in the scenario that we're in now in order to find the courage to take the radical action that's really, really needed. And so, you know, when we depoliticize an issue like resource management at a time like now, I think it's a massive problem, because we are completely out of time. We're seeing no leadership. We're faced with this abject uncertainty, mass loss, and I think we need to really engage in supporting each other through the emotional experience that facing this reality really requires. And then we're looking at turbulent change. You know, we're looking at mass destruction, mass displacement of people, refugee crisis, and we've committed through a failure at the global level of leadership not to create any hope at all, actually, and to condemn nations to disappear and lands to become uninhabitable. And it looks very, very likely that this is what's coming down the road. So whilst we need to look at how we manage resources and how we're designing systems, this has to be part of a massive, radical rethink of our entire economy at the same time. And so my question is always, if we need to reduce consumption of materials and we need to stop fashion from growing, then how is the circularity work helping us to do that? And how can we make sure that it does help us to do that? And I'll finish, I guess, by just saying that I think one place to look for me, which I find really mind expanding, is this question of the efficiency paradox, of the Jevons paradox. I think often sustainability conversations have begun in some places from thinking about, well, how can we at least just make them more efficient? And actually, there's a paradox which is very well understood, that when you make things more efficient, you use more resources, not less, in general. And in the context of the culture we've got in kind of planned obsolescence, the competitive nature of our industry, waste being given as the problem to the citizen and the individual, which I think again is politically not cool as far as I'm concerned. The guilt and then the alleviation of that guilt by shopping better, and making these waste problems seem manageable when we know that with economic growth we're going to get more waste even if we make our systems more efficient. Then I think we have to question, what is it that we're trying to keep? What is it that we're trying to protect? And how can we design systems that go beyond circularity and look at regeneration, regenerative cultures, regenerative ways of interacting with people, and be super ambitious and refuse to be reformist, because we need to find what's possible beyond our kind of industrialized fashion system. And I think this speaks a lot about needing to reassess value, and if we at least pluralize that to values, then where do we go, and what can we get to when we recognize that we're starting with a culture which really lacks a sense of value. What happens when we accept that there is very little morally neutral work that's possible at the moment, particularly if we're designers? And how can we bring a degrowth or a divestment or a reparations framework through our thinking, and just to work through ideas of transformation and see where it's possible to go? Because we do a talk from the art department in XR which says design isn't important. What design does is the only thing that's important.
No problem. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you so much, Neliana, for two amazing talks, really inspiring and calling us to action. Quite different in both approaches, but we're kind of bringing those together. I was really captured by what you said, Claire, about this kind of do it together, and I saw some comments in the chat. But that kind of reflects a little bit of what Neliana's kind of talking about, is this kind of doing it together, bringing people together, really connecting that full chain. So while you're both taking amazing actions in totally different ways, I have a question I'm going to pose to both of you on those kinds of lines of collaboration and working together. So the different actors and policymakers and industry stakeholders, what that you're sort of working with, what challenges have you come across when communicating the values or the specific requirements to have a more sustainable world? And on top of that, to kind of inspire our audience, do you have any ideas or examples of how you can overcome some of these challenges, to collaborate more effectively across different sectors for a circular economy and a more sustainable future?
Thank you. Hi, Claire. Nice to be here with you. Well, if I may say, I think our industry talks a lot about collaboration, and it's not a straight line, and I think that has created a lot more confusion. I believe that all of us have different type of experiences and opinions and perspectives, and especially expertise. So I think that is when we need to look at ourselves and be like, how can I put my expertise or what I know to the service of the common goals, which in this case is a more sustainable, transparent, circular industry. And how can we use collaborative tools for the benefit of the goal, the common goal? And I think it's extremely challenging. And this is why I have fallen in love with technologies like blockchain, because it allows space for everyone to commit information in this case, and for having a third party that it's very neutral to define levels of trust and to create a more safe space, a secure space. I think I like what you said, Claire, about hope, and I believe truly that if we lose hope, that will be the end of it. And I think hope is something that keeps us thriving, and this is why we're all here today. I would just say collaboration it's key, but it's the biggest challenge.
Well, I think for me as part of a movement, the collaboration across disciplines is one of the things that's made XR so special, because I don't know how you would do it again to get that combination of people together, of kind of about 10 of us basically worked flat out to get it started, and we were attached to a small team of people that were either working on legal or actions or art and design, and so, you know, having that magic combination of people was really, really lucky, I think, particularly some of the people the depth of their thinking in their field. And so in some ways, I think, you know, bringing together science with legal, with creatives, with direct action activists and various other things was kind of is fundamental to being able to sort of break new ground. And so I think there's something about working interdisciplinary with different people that you wouldn't normally expect to work with, which has to be part of like finding the solutions that we need, because we just definitely haven't found all of the answers, right? And I think there's a really brilliant climate scientist called Schellenhuber, and he described that, you know, in this moment of great risk, we have to take risk as well to get out of it. You're not going to get out of this by making a return on every bit of investment. You have to try a lot of shit. You've got to do it all at once, really fast, and you keep what works and drop what doesn't. And it's really not about you. It's really bigger than you. It's really bigger than your balance sheet. And so I find that really inspiring, that approach to saying to people really candidly, like, you are not going to make a big profit out of this. You might not make any profit out of it. You might stop your business from being something that, you know, contributes to the end of the world, or that your children are ashamed of. And, you know, do you want to die thinking, oh, yeah, I wish I'd done a bit more actually, because I was really empowered and I just didn't do that thing, you know? Like, it is that point now. We've got to think about what we want to be remembered for, I think.
I think that question about empowerment is really, really interesting. And like, yeah, like I said, please keep all these conversations going. I had a question specifically about, it's like something that really sort of like connects both of you is the fact that you're both designers at core, but also that you've moved quite radically away from like the conventional sort of approach of design, which is, you know, to produce a product. And I was wondering if this was something that like you'd reflected upon a little bit, if you'd really sort of come to moments of realization of like, oh yeah, this is a particularly sort of like designerly way of seeing the world, of developing solutions, and if you had any examples of like moments in which like your design background has really been quite influential in the way you take decision and like change the world around you in a way. Who wants to go first? Neliana.
Well, if I may share, I think my dream when I was 18 was to become a fashion designer. I moved from Venezuela to London. I did everything I could to get the right education, pay for it, still paying for it. But yeah, I think when we're young and we have this passion for what we want our lives to be, we do anything possible. And then I hit the wall when I realized that I was being part of a problem, in the sense that I already was committed to sustainability and since a long time, and I found myself being part of the problem, and that's when I had to make a very radical decision to step out, and that's when I decided to become or go more into the entrepreneurial side of things. Still, you find so many obstacles, but that is when you have to be very honest with yourselves. Like, what are my values? What am I ready to fight for? What do I want to be known for or remember as, like Claire just said. So I think it's almost like peeling off layers. And I know my brain is still, I train as a designer, I think like a designer, but it's so important to learn other skills and to understand how you can talk to other people that have other expertise. In my case was sustainability or supply chains or technology, and how can you come about, how can you create like a vision together, and how is that going to be part of the solution? So I decided to be part of the solution, and I think we all are here. It's just a matter of how can we contribute the best, and how can we make sure that we accelerate the processes, because in the world we live in today, there's a lot of steps that are quite 20th century still, and I think we need to realize that in 5 years is 25, a quarter of a century. I think we need to, and with the situation we're going through now with COVID, I think we're accelerating these processes, and I hope that is going to accelerate positive impact.
Well, I think, yeah, I similarly thought that I was going to be a fashion designer when I was small. I was like, oh, that's definitely what I want to do. And I'm in love with textiles and getting dressed and self-expression and music and art and all the things that seem like they're all sort of bound up together with it. And I guess, you know, throughout my time at university and into the commercial space, I just couldn't help but feel that it's quite pointless. A lot of our industry is just totally pointless, and you know, that's upsetting, and it's difficult to deal with when you sort of realize that the thing that you've like wanted to do and the thing you've longed to be is actually a load of shit. And so there's something about like I totally agree with you about peeling off layers and like and taking yourself back a step and back another step and back another step. And at some point, you know, quite early on, I remember just thinking there is no way to like reconcile
I think Claire has just lost her signal, unfortunately.
I thought that was me.
I told you in that tech check, didn't I? I was like, oh, my internet went really bad recently. Yeah, when it seems that you're stuck in a system which can't facilitate the work that you need to do, you see what needs to happen. Everything that's like embedded in our business practices, in the way that businesses and corporations are built, in the legal structure, everything about global commodity trading, it's like the system is fully wired up so that you can't do something good. And also so that it becomes like, now we're living in an age, I think, where it is a radical act just to have a small business, because there's so little room for anybody to run independent businesses. And so the situation is just getting worse and worse in that way. And I don't think that I think it's been difficult wrestling all my career with wanting to sort of do something which is perfectly at odds with the way things are done. And you know, perhaps that's why I'm now in rebellion, because I realized that my sort of immature self that went, someone's got to go and fix the fashion industry. And so you go off really naive thinking, I'm going to like learn a bit and then try and change things. And when you realize that it's like quite simply not possible the way things are set up, then, you know, why not go and try and like change the system that it's couched in, right? So I guess that's, you know, that's where I kind of end up in this place where I am now.
Yeah, I think like those perspectives are really interesting, and I think there's a conversation also around like the difference between like fashion industry and sort of fashion experiences and sort of like, yeah, clothing versus fashion. I think Becky has a really interesting comment or question on this. So Becky, if you want to come in. Hello. I don't know, Becky, did you want to talk about this? I mean, it was generally a really interesting point around. Right, really, I think there's something interesting about like decoupling our fashion experiences from the industry as it stands today. And there have been some really like great questions in the chat, and Neliana, I saw that you actually answered one, but I think someone was asking around like how information should be like an important sort of like factor in your work, and I think like there's something that like really connects to the questions that people have been asking about your work, Neliana, there, and your work, Claire, around like really sort of like talking about these things and using our design perspectives to like create these stories, which are a way of actually building a new narrative. And whether it's about transparency in fashion or about actually sort of like really challenging the way in which we perceive the world in the industry, I think that's something that you're both doing like quite beautifully. And like, yeah, maybe it does need to sort of like be broken away from like the big machine that fashion is. And I really like how it's Naomi Klein who talks about how one of our big problems in terms of, you know, climate emergency is the fact that we have the wrong story, and we think that, you know, the superhero is going to come in like right at the last minute and save us all. And I think it's really important for us to like start telling these new stories that do challenge the way in which things are happening at the moment. Becky, you're in. Or not.
I like what Becky wrote, fashion versus clothing. I think that's a very interesting discussion. And it is a bit like fashion is the dream and clothing is the functionality, but there's so much more to that.
I think if you check out that article that I posted in the chat, it's a really interesting reflection on how we actually think that the fashion system, the Western fashion system, is like the ultimate fashion system, and how we've kind of erased cultures and we've erased indigenous systems of dress, basically. And it's a cultural domination, you know, and the world is like swimming in white supremacy and Eurocentrism, and we're just having all of this kind of exposed right now through this sudden sort of upsurge in anti-racist sentiment all over the world, which just been triggered by that point of George Floyd's horrible murder. And I think, you know, it offers us a possibility to reflect on these things in ways which felt much more difficult to have those conversations, I think, even just a few months ago, as it sort of sinks into people, and we're really hearing more and more about, you know, our colonial history. The fashion industry is built on slavery, and it's still full of slavery. Like, none of that has gone away. It's just been hidden away much better than it was before. And, you know, COVID is going to create further race to the bottom. There's going to be increase in child labour because of the race to the bottom on prices. Our industry is changing like this all the time, and it just feels so out of control to us, you know. And they're talking about claw that and get back.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a
to empower people to be able to begin the conversations about how to go on this journey of changing things really radically, really quickly. And that's why our team have started a new thing called Fashion Act Now, which is in the kind of spirit of Extinction Rebellion. You know, if you don't get your demands met, just do it yourself. And so, you know, they haven't cancelled Fashion Week and replaced it with a crisis meeting for the industry. So we're going to hold one instead. And I think if you sit people around the table who are variously from the brand, from the retailer, from the factory floor, from the pattern cutter, the technologist, the weaver, get these people from the sector who are never ever seen on the level playing field, and sit everybody around the same space to have a conversation about what's really going on and what do people really want to happen, you know. And that has to happen with the most vulnerable and the most marginalized people at the table having the same amount of airtime as like people like us or CEOs or whatever. And I think that's the beginning of a radical conversation that hopes to find a way to build a new framework for how we can work together.
Yeah. It's been really brilliant perspectives. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up here, but I wanted to sort of like just give you a chance here to sort of like maybe talk to our audience here, who is like a lot of students at UAL, and maybe in like one sentence or a few words, consider like what you might want to tell the students to do who might feel like, you know, a little bit lost in like the complexity of this field, or wonder what they can do with their own work, with their own design practice. So what would be your advice to students?
Well, from my side, as a former UAL student, both BA and MA, I would say that it is really important to take your time while you're studying to research, to really question yourself what is that you want to bring to the world with your knowledge, and how does your role as a designer or in anything you're doing within fashion can create positive impact. And at the end of the day, we're all consumers, and I believe that we vote every time with our wallets. We choose products. From your coffee, from your way of traveling, from the fabric and materials you buy for your designs or anything you do. So I would just really encourage you to use mindfulness when you are choosing products and services for your life every day, because this is how we are creating impact every day. So vote with your wallets and ask questions.
I would say that alongside that, and I think often these things are seen in opposition, because we have like this sort of chronic problem with binary thinking, but also, as well as doing that, refuse to take the sole blame for this situation personally, because it's so heavy And there are people who are phenomenally rich and phenomenally powerful who have literally created this situation on purpose. And we need to examine those power dynamics and recognize collective power, as well as recognizing our individual responsibilities. And don't let your individual responsibility grind you down so much that you forget that you're part of a collective that is really, really powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. It's been like such an amazing conversation to sort of like hear like both your perspectives on this. And I think actually it ties in beautifully well with our next session, which is about workshops and really sort of like getting everyone to sort of like start using their own ideas and so like considering what the issues are and like having a bit of a deep dive into that, also considering the time. But and yeah, exploring solutions and like having that balance, which I think you've both beautifully brought to like this digital table, is this sort of connection between like, you know, extreme optimism and extreme sort of like clarity of vision also, which like both which I don't want to call pessimism, but like clarity of vision does tend to lead to pessimism. But I think there's a beautiful balance between those two, and yeah, it's going to be great to see how everyone takes that on into the workshop. In terms of actually, so thank you both, like huge round of applause, and it would be great to like keep connecting. Like I said, this is the beginning of conversations.
Yeah, everybody would just, again, as we did in the first session, if you could show your appreciation in the chat bar for both Claire and Neliana for fantastic presentations and Q&A. It's been really wonderful to have their work. We're now going to be moving into our workshop session. So this is the main and centre part of the workshop, the worksheet that we'll be getting you to work on. And we want you really to think about the four quadrants of the life cycle when we're thinking about the circular economy. So those are materials, processes, use phase with the customer, and recovery, and thinking about the recovery of those things. What we've done with this quadrant is that we've split each of those four sections into two. We want you to start thinking about the problems and the solutions for all of these four quadrants. And not everybody in the workshop will be doing the same worksheet. We've actually split this into three categories to kind of represent the day. We've had some amazing speakers talking about various different areas of the circular economy. So we're going to get some of you to be looking at clothing, some of you to look at food, and some of you to look at architecture. Now, you'll see that we've put lovely orange placeholders in the centre of these worksheets, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to talk about that specific object. You can talk about clothing in general. You can talk specifically about a single clothing. If you would like to talk about the hoodie that is in the middle of the circle, that of course is fine. Equally, it could be chips, but with food, we want you to think wide, think broad, or specifically if you like. And the same with architecture. That could be office buildings, it could be homes, it could be the way that we live in society as a whole. So the first part of the workshop, we really want you to be focusing on the problems. So when you're looking at your worksheets, it will be filling in these parts of the worksheets and thinking about all the problems that go with materials, with the processing of those materials, how those materials are then used as products, and then how can they be recovered at the end. We'll then ask you to move on to the solutions, and this is obviously the most exciting part. So we want you to think about not only solutions for some of the problems that you've been outlining, but some of the other amazing solutions. So really it's about thinking big and trying to get all your ideas down. This workshop is about you guys brainstorming and thinking and being able to take away from this session hopefully ideas not only you have come up with and you've heard of, but also collaborating with people but that perhaps you haven't worked with. And we'll be putting you into random groups. So hopefully there'll be a really broad mix of people so you can come up with some really great ideas. The final part of the worksheet, step 3, is thinking about people and politics. So this is really kind of harping back to the circular action session that we've just had with some of our speakers. So we want you to think about the policy that needs to be involved to make some of these solutions happen. Thinking about the people that are involved around this life cycle. Who are the people that are producing these materials? Who are the people that are processing them? What is the consumer like? What about the social justice aspects that Claire has really highlighted in her talk that are really centred around this circle? So that's sort of layered over the top. Now, this is what your worksheet is going to look like. You'll have instructions down the left-hand side and then the actual worksheet that you'll be working on the right-hand side. We've indicated that you need to spend 10 minutes on each of the sections and you'll be getting to annotate onto those sections.